We need to start thinking of emotions as actions we do in the body rather than sort of things that happen to us as if we were, talk about somatic responsibility. And when someone says, you made me angry, for example, that's blatantly ridiculous because someone else could be in the same place with the same stimulus and not have the same emotional response. Like, let's say music came on and you hated it and I loved it. Now, music didn't make you angry and me happy. Like, we literally are the only ones who have that response. And as we get older, we can have some control over that. We're not 2-year-olds. And we can certainly learn skills to really fine tune that, to regulate ourselves, to manage those patterns. That's one way to work somatically. There are other ways to work. We might actually need to express our anger or learn to express it in a safe, controlled way. It might be about boundaries and learning to get a solid no in our body so we then don't have to overcompensate with anger. So, there's a posture we teach with embodied yoga principles, which is one of the methods I use. And people can Google that. They can see my beautiful Ukrainian wife. I wondered for a while it was the most popular video. I think I figured it out.
Welcome to Think Bigger, Think Better, where we explore how you can apply insights from visionary leaders and the most provocative philosophers and scientists of our time to make your life and our world a better place. Here's your host, author and speaker, Paul Gibbons.
Hey, and welcome back to Think Bigger, Think Better. Thanks for all the terrific feedback on our populism episode last week. In coming shows, we're going to have Massimo Pigliucci, a fascinating guy, serial author and founder of the very big Rationally Speaking podcast. And then we are going to turn to evidence-based. What the hell does that mean? And how does it apply in medicine, management, and public policy? And then finally, we're going to talk to Steven Pinker about his new book on enlightenment. So keep listening and keep telling your friends. Thank you. Remember also to review the podcast on iTunes. It takes about 15 seconds, maybe less, maybe 5. And then tell me you've done so in an email and I'll send you one of the author's books that we featured on the show. Today, we're going to talk about embodiment with one of the world's experts. His name is Mark Walsh. But let me give you a little précis. So in contemporary psychology, who we are and how we grow, learn, and change are mental phenomena. In today's episode, we're going to look at a radical new view, the body and its role and change. You won't find this in textbooks. The ideas my guest Mark Walsh shares today are found in very few places, some workshops, some personal development courses, some philosophers, and even then in very, very few of those. So here's a trigger warning. Mark is pure authenticity. So if you object to cussing, we get a little bit salty here and there. So before we start, what is embodiment? So one view of the body is that it's a brain taxi. It is there to keep alive and carry around the most important and interesting part of the self, which is the mind. This so dominates our view of the world today that anything other than that is seen as alien. The self, the personality, intelligence, the emotional life, all the things that you think about yourself, all of the things that people would use to describe you are mental. The body is separate. We might describe someone in bodily terms, and the body has its own concerns. It has health concerns, medical concerns, aesthetic concerns. Sometimes we want a six-pack. We want to be curved where we ought to be curved, and we want to be flat where we want to be flat. But this separateness, the body as a health, medical, aesthetic domain, and the self, the mind, a separate mental domain, is really limited. By and large, this misses a trick. So take someone who's passionate. To embody this idea of passionate, say you're passionate about a subject, there's a physical aliveness in the eyes and the posture and the voice and the pace and tone. Say you want, as a leader, to more passionately express your vision, then part of learning to do that will be bodily. You can't just think passionate, you need to embody passion. And then you'll need to work with the body correlates of the attributes of passion, not just the mental processes of being passionate. So embodiment affects the domains of learning and of self-regulation. So the question is for people interested in self-development and leadership development, how can your bodily practice help you develop the self? or if you're in the gym or in your yoga class, your body is working and you're working on your body. But unless that working on your body is connected to bigger goals, like being more compassionate or being more passionate, it's separate. To be, say, more flexible in life, or to have more stamina in life, or more perseverance in life, you can connect those sorts of narratives with your physical practice. Embodiment isn't just concerned with behavior, but, sort of a duh, if you want change, your body is going to have to do it. So just changing your mental life might be useful. You might be depressed, you might be anxious. But to have results in life, starting a business, starting a family, changing your behaviors, whatever they are, your behaviors have to follow your intentions. And here we are. That's a little précis of the world of embodiment. If you're unfamiliar with this kind of thinking, it may seem strange. That's because it's novel, and that's because it's countercultural. So have some patience and see what you can get from listening to Mark Walsh and I discuss this. Mark, from England, is a pioneer in what is called somatic or embodied education. He has studied with world leaders in this field, notably with Paul Linden, and synthesizes their work with contemporary best practice in adult learning. He runs not only corporate programs for the Global 100, but also works with communities in conflict zones. He teaches yoga and is an experienced martial artist. His current projects include his own podcast, the Embodiment Podcast, his YouTube channels, the Embodiment Channel. He's the CEO of Integration Training UK and the Embodied Yoga Principles. I'm going to put links to all of those in the show notes. And right now, let's welcome Mark. Welcome, Mark, to Think Bigger, Think Better. You take on a lot of stuff in life, and I want to start with, I guess, the thing that unites all of your stuff, right, is this idea of embodiment. Is that too naive a way of talking about what you do?
No, that's the central thing in all the many things that I do.
All right, cool. Well, all right, let's tell people, what is embodiment?
What the hell is that? Yeah, this is the bane of my life, is being at parties and people say, what do you do? So I'm an embodiment teacher, and I wish I was a fucking plumber at that point so people would know what I did.
All right.
There's many, many definitions. The simplest way is the study of how we are. So that's the 3-word definition in relationship to the body. So the idea here is the body is more than a brain taxi. The body is an integral part of who we are. So you can view the body as an object, as a piece of meat, and that, there's advantages to that at certain times, like medically, for example. But also the body has a subjective element. It's an aspect of our being, an aspect of who we are. In many ways, this may sound very philosophical and abstract, but in many ways, this is common sense. If you're in a particular mood, the world looks different, you think different, your relationships are different, that people have a way of being in the body, which you can spot. A child can spot it, a dog can spot it. Some people you cross the street to avoid. Sometimes you might just realize, oh, wow, that person's in a really good mood. Maybe this is a good time to ask them for that thing or talk to them about politics or not. How we live in bodies as bodies is what embodiment's all about. And then you can also talk of it as a type of intelligence. So you can talk of it as involving skill sets such as body awareness, self-regulation, empathy, leadership, all embodied traits. I can dig into any of those if you're interested. And we could also look at it lastly as a way in which several fields have come together. So there's yoga, there's martial arts, there's improv comedy, there's body psychotherapy. There's all these different fields, about 6 major ones that work with the body in a sort of depth psychological way, rather than a kind of body or fitness way. So there's the difference there, embodied. And they're kind of coming together. And this really started on the West Coast in the US in the 60s and started to come to some maturity in recent years, where all these people started talking to each other. And it's like, okay, well, this field needs a name. So we can say, right, yeah, you've got one piece of the embodiment puzzle in yoga, but there's another piece in Aikido, another piece in Tango. And how do we bring those all together? So that's really been my life's work, obsession. It's what I do. It's the end of a Friday afternoon here in England. I'm just about to go to London, spending my weekend doing yoga in London, meeting other embodiment people. I've really built a lot of community on and offline from this embodiment community. So yeah, there's a long answer. It's definitely the word most associated with my work.
Well, all right, well, let's tear into it. So sometimes in common everyday speak, you'll hear people saying you've got to embody your values. Is that something is that part of what you mean by embodiment?
Yeah. there's a sort of literal and metaphorical version of that. I think it is a nice usage. And continuously in language, you'll see people intuitively pointing to the idea of embodiment. They say that person's got backbone, or he's a stand-up guy. There's always this intuitive pointing in language. And in this case, someone embodies something, that could just mean they very literally, their behavior matches what they say, their values, that congruence. But it's also this sense that it goes deep, that it's who they are, not just what they do. So if we look at the level of being, it's like, embodiment isn't just something I do. I'm an embodiment teacher. It's like I embody being that. And same when you meet anyone who's really integrous and passionate about what they do, it's at the level of being, it's at the level of who they are. And I want to stress here that I'm not talking about how tall someone is, how fat someone is. That's body. And, you could be very grounded and still have no legs, for example. Yeah. So it's something a bit more subtle than body. And there are certainly body prejudices, which is not what I'm talking about. We're all unconsciously embodied.
Yeah, so there's like a doing thing, which is behavior. So if you said somebody embodies compassion, you would expect to see compassionate behaviors, but then you say it goes deeper. So who their being is compassion. How would that show up in the body? Like, how would someone who embodies compassion, apart from watching what they do, right? How would you see? I mean, this may be a question to which there's no answer, but anyway, so how would you see someone embodying something like compassion?
Well, I'd put that out to anyone listening and just say, you already know the answer to this. If you see someone who is tight and moving a jagged kind of movement pattern, and their breathing's contracted and their face is contracted and their belly's contracted, is that person likely to be compassionate? And we could say probably not. When I was younger, I was brought up as a Christian. My mum actually was a nun before she met my dad. And I was always taught, Jesus said, love thy neighbor. And I thought, that sounds great. And my next question was, how? And embodiment's the one answer to that, there's what's the method for doing that, for being, say, more compassionate or a better leader? You read a book on leadership, it's like, be a better leader. It's like, well, how? So what's the methodology of change around that? As I was just saying before, we're all unconsciously embodied, right? So we all have a set of patterns, dispositions. When you look at a human being, you look at history, you look at, they're leaning in a certain direction, both literally and metaphorically, in the sense that there's certain behaviors are more available to them. And that's your personality, that's your character, right? Like, we all have that. And that forms for our experiences, a lot of it when we're young, maybe some genetic component. And we have a certain kind of character, a certain leaning, and people see that in us. That's something that most of us have at least a pretty good felt sense for. And that's unconscious in most people. And, if it's pretty interesting for most people to become aware of that. So to actually become aware of okay, I have a certain set of habits, certain leaning, and then I can change those either in the short term, like just state regulation. For me, I'm so much more compassionate when I'm relaxed and happy. When I'm rushing and stressed and miserable, maybe that's just haven't had a good night's sleep. I'm just a lot less likely to be kind. And as someone who would like to be kind, managing my state, both in terms of those biological things, but also it might just be in the moment, just going, okay, let's take a breath before I respond to my wife, or before I, respond angrily to this email or whatever it is. I can regulate myself in the moment. That's a skill. If you don't have that, you are a toddler. You have a president right now that has very bad self-regulation. And it's obvious that he's, does things impulsively without being able to regulate. And then maybe more unusually to people would be the longer how do we change ourselves over time? And that's where practice comes in. This idea that we develop ourselves over time, not through reading books, not through thinking about it, but through actually practicing developing ourselves.
So you would say, there are three things in there I want to double click on. You would say that the personality has a bodily component, has a physical, the physical shape that people are. Is the personality, is it just this thing that shows up on tests, or it's not just whether you're an arsehole or whether you're kind or whatever like that? You say that all of that has a body. Give me an example, of what would a body that was like an arsehole, or no, that's a bad example.
Well, let me give you some of the evidence base on this. So, it comes with ancient wisdom and, body therapy and things that aren't so scientifically established, but there's plenty of studies out there on this, for, extroverts swing their arms more. Pixar animators know this. There happens to be a Pixar animator with the exact same name as me. And through an accident, we kind of were in contact. And it was quite interesting to chat to him, Mark Walsh, because basically in order to show the character in animation, they have to understand the movement patterns. Whether it's the inward roll of the shoulders or the inward point of the feet of the average introvert, whether it's the arm swing of the average extrovert, there's all these kind of things. Culture is embodied in the same way as personality. There's a reason Brazilians move in a certain way. Now, what we have to be careful of here is it's not every individual in a culture, and also that any particular thing can have multiple meanings. And it's, let's say you have outwardly rotated femurs, so your feet point kind of out. Does that mean that you're, kind of V-shaped, as you stand with your feet together, so the heels will be together and toes will be apart? Do you sit that way simply because of the shape of your leg bones may be different from other people's? There's quite a lot of variance. Did you do ballet as a kid? Or are you extroverted? They're all possibilities. And it's key here that it's not so much just the gross physical things, as I said, but it's how we are in our bodies. So, Stephen Hawking, for example, has an extremely animated embodiment. He's lively as anything. And that character is not only expressed through that, but created through that. This is what embodiment means. It's not just body language. We're creating our character moment by moment in this way of being, of posture, breathing, movement, not so much kind of shape or size. And that doesn't have to be limited by kind of physical limitations. Stephen Hawking, for example, can't actually physically move a whole lot, but he can move enough that it's creating his way of being, that kind of lively, cheeky, sharp way of being.
Sure. And it lives in his language, and it lives in his just animated. And you can always, when you're listening, just talking, you can always hear the guy grinning. Even, it's kind of funny.
Even though it's coming through a computer, but certainly voice is an expression of body, this is.
So let me think about this. So personality wise, so the bunched forehead or the knitted brow or the super tight jaw or the hunched shoulders or the rounded back or the gluteal muscles that are squeezed really, really tight. All of those have personality correlates. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think it's better to talk in terms of preferences, patterns. We see correlates rather than hardcore, getting into if you have this, it means that. That's far too simplistic, as I said, because there's all these different variables and different things. But, this idea of body reading, some people are very finely attuned at this. And some people, even in the field of embodiment, say, look, body reading doesn't really exist. It's not really a real thing. There's still people on that end of the spectrum. So, from the black and white end to the it doesn't exist end. And, most people in the field fall somewhere in the middle of saying, yeah, there's some validity to this. There's definitely some science behind some of these starting to be developed. But you don't believe me. This is something you can try out. If you're listening to this, just listen to this with your head tilted back for 5 minutes and then listen to it with your head tilted forward for 5 minutes and see how you receive it differently. Uncross your arms or walk a little bit differently if you're listening to this podcast walking along the street. See how that affects you to bring your awareness down to your feet or up to the top of your head. These are all experiments. I really always say to my students, don't believe a word I say. You can actually experience different embodiments.
Right. Yeah, try it for yourself. This is interesting. So say that I'm an angry dude. I mean, I have been in therapy for angry outbursts a couple of decades ago. And all of therapy happens through talk.
Yeah.
What you're saying, I think, or the inference implication of what you're saying is that there are limits to without addressing. We can't change our talk or change our attitudes or change our responses. I wanted to become less explosive. So we can't just hope the body follows along, that we need to be thinking about the body as part of that reaction. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, you could work through language, through thought, looking at maybe you're being very, I've worked with angry people, often very judgmental on themselves, for example, and you could...
No.
No, it doesn't ring any bells. Every single person I've worked with anger is harder on themselves than everyone else. So you could work with the thought process. However, you can think of this as a coherence. This is one organization I've worked for, talk about the coherence of emotion, body, and language. So yeah, you could go in with language, you could talk about it. Talking about emotions, though, is a little bit like dancing about architecture, because emotions.
That's a great one.
I stole that from where it comes from. But what are emotions? Emotions are bodily actions. Anger is done with the tense belly, the tight jaw, the contracted eyes, and a forward-moving, angular and
flush face, and all of that. Yeah. There's a physiological component, and there's a morphological component, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And it's very hard to be angry while leaning back in your chair, softening your belly, softening your eyes, softening your jaw. because you just undid anger. This is one of Paul Linden's, one of my teachers, kind of big guys, big things, is like anger as an action. We need to start thinking of emotions as actions we do in the body, rather than sort of things that happen to us, as if we were, talk about somatic responsibility. And when someone says, you made me angry, for example, that's blatantly ridiculous, because someone else could be in the same place with the same stimulus and not have the same emotional response. Like, let's say music came on and you hated it and I loved it. Now, music didn't make you angry and me happy. Like, we literally are the only ones who have that response. And as we get older, we can have some control over that. We're not 2-year-olds. And we can certainly learn skills to really fine tune that, to regulate ourselves, to manage those patterns. That's one way to work somatically. There are other ways to work. We might actually need to express our anger or learn to express it in a safe, controlled way. It might be about boundaries and learning to get a solid no in our body, so we then don't have to overcompensate with anger. So, there's a no posture we teach with embodied yoga principles, which is one of the methods I use. And people can Google that. They can see my beautiful Ukrainian wife. I wondered for a while it was the most popular video. I think I figured it out.
Because of Daria.
Daria is demonstrating the posture. Yeah. And so that's no posture. You can see her do that on YouTube. And it's a way of like finding that no in the system. But again, like, people reveal patterns. I show one posture and we have 10 people in the class doing it in 10 different ways. And some people are aggressive, some people are passive, some people are wide open, some people are closed, defensive. Like, everyone's not making. This is the beauty of form practice, whether it's yoga or martial arts or whatever, is you don't make mistakes. You accidentally express yourself. So form practices can be really useful for learning about those. And then there's the freedom practices of, like, going crazy, 5 rhythms dancing and jumping around and, or just stretching and moving, rolling around your floor, like actually letting the body express itself and move through the process of the body, rather than just always controlling and regulating, because you can turn into a bit of a robot that way. And, in therapy, trauma work was where the body really re-entered therapy. There was a guy called Bessel van der Kolk who works in the States, but originally from the Netherlands. And he wrote a paper called the seminal paper called The Body Keeps the Score.
So like trauma, like PTSD or sexual abuse.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I've worked in war zones. My main mentor works a lot with abuse recovery. And, so I was informed of that. And he, basically you can't talk your way out of trauma. It's sometimes helpful to talk and be listened to. Empathy is a beautiful thing, but they realized that the trauma was held in the body and that you needed to do some work with the body. And there's things like somatic experiencing, Peter Levine, there's other somatic modalities, body modalities, somatic, just you can replace with embodied. And, people realize that you can, just talking about it wasn't enough. And this is really indicative of.
Well, hang on. Let me just stop you 1 sec. So, what does it mean that trauma is held in the body for my listeners? What does that mean? Like PTSD or sexual? Like, what does that mean to be held in the body?
Yeah. So if someone's come back from Afghanistan or they've had a trauma background, you'll see it in patterns of the body. So you'll either see, for example, hyperarousal. So they're stuck in that fight-flight response where they're, it's the jumpy Vietnam veteran kind of stereotype, or someone just can't sleep or can't concentrate, like that hyperarousal. They're in that body mode of being ready to fight or run away. Or they're in a freeze response where things are closed down, and it might be like work in Russia a lot, and you'll see a lot of faces and jaws that are very tight. That's a kind of cultural trauma pattern almost. The Israelis I work there tend to have this hyperarousal that makes them very quick. So you might see it like in those kind of generalized patterns, or it'd be bands of what's called armoring, which are chronic muscular contraction that serves no obvious functionality. So this really shows embodiment. Like, none of us stand or sit or walk in a way which would be biologically prescribed.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if there was a computer model of how a human being walks, nobody fucking walks that way. Or like, how are you sitting or standing right now? I would just ask anyone as you're listening to this, it's probably not in the most sort of architecturally functional way.
Yeah.
Because its body is actually doing something else. It's supporting you physically. That's part of the body's job. But it's also creating you. It's also socially signaling. It's also regulating your moods. It's also, an expression of everything that's ever happened to you in your life. So it's no wonder you're not standing, for example, with the middle of your foot lined up with the middle of your knee joint and the middle of your hip socket, which would be functionally the best way to stand, just from a kind of architecture point of view. Nobody stands that way because there's too much other stuff going on, and that other stuff, the body's role in perfection, perception, cognition, emotion, social relations, politics, is what embodiment is.
Make that list again. So what was that list like? I'm standing in a particular way. What's that reflective of at a deeper level?
Reflective of and creating. So it's a bi-directional link. So body language creating as well. Perception. So how do you see the world? And
whether the cast of my eyes is down or up, or my vision is narrowed or broad, is that sort of thing? Yeah, my perception.
No, literally, even more than that. Like literally, your perception of the world. Like what do you notice, and how do things seem is affected by your embodiment. Like we all know this, right? Let's say you got well laid and then you went out for breakfast and all of a sudden you start noticing different things because you're happy and relaxed.
Yeah.
Like we've all been on holiday and wow, like all of a sudden the world seems different.
Wow, I've never seen this. Never seen a sunset like that, or that's the most beautiful woman.
Yeah. Everything's amazing when you're in love, right? It's like, it's not all, it's like, wow, this is the best tasting coffee I've ever had. It's like, no, you're just in love and your perception's changing, That's great. It's a physiological thing. Your cognition. And there's lots of studies on this. There's a guy called the dance doctor, Peter Lover at Hertfordshire University. And he had people move in a square angular way. And he had another group of people move in a kind of crazy Californian way. And what he discovered was the first group got better at maths and the second group got better at creative problem solving. And that's simply as a result of getting them to move differently.
That's wild.
And we all have like Stuart Heller is a big name in this field, says we move through space like we move through life. Yeah, we move through space like we move through life. And I would add to that, if we want to change our lives, we can also change how we move through space. So is that like how the pace of walking and whether we're inclined forward or whether we're thrown back on our heels or all that stuff, right? Yeah. Like real simple shit people can experiment with. Again, don't believe me. If you're got a head full of thoughts racing at 1,000 miles an hour, a bit like that at the end of a week of work, by walking slower or sitting back in your chair if you're sitting, and if you're feeling a bit sluggish and you're kind of like, oh, I'm listening to this, I'm walking to work and I'm a bit, actually push from the back foot, put your head up, walk a bit quicker. It's real easy to change these things and to change your mood, to change your perception, emotion. Just to come back to the list would be a big one. The emotion is kind of like the canvas our life is painted on. It's not just a sort of occasional thing that happens. And the kind of disposition would be the longer term emotion, which we don't even feel. This is the scary thing. It's like the part of us that we've got so used to, like comfortable underpants or the taste of our own mouth, we've habituated.
Yeah.
Everybody else feels it. Like you have a certain voice pool, right? And in that voice, and if someone listens to 5 or 6 episodes of your podcast, they'll really feel it. Some people will feel it right away, but everyone will feel it after 5, 10 podcast episodes. And some people will love it, some people will hate it. And my experience of listening to podcasts is eventually the person's embodiment becomes unbearable and everyone gets annoying eventually, right?
Don't tell me that. I just started.
No, but it's like people would listen to a load and then they'll go, oh, this is great content. But there'll be something in your voice which reflects an embodiment which they may really like or they may not like, just intuitively, right?
And that will be pace, language, tone, breathing. I mean, it'll be linguistic stuff, but it'll be a lot of the stuff that's created by the body because the vocal cords are the body. The lungs are part of the body and the jaw and the size of the mouth cavity and that makes all these sounds. That's all part of the body. So what you're saying is even speech, language is super embodied in a particular way, right?
For sure. Like I worked a lot with interpreters and it's fascinating because I say something and the interpreter can completely ruin the message by changing the tone. So I'll say, right, everyone, welcome. And the translator in Russian will say, do, 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 do. And it's like, okay, you just ruined my message. And another thing happens is
that's so funny. I never thought of that actually. Right.
Train my translators and my interpreters an embodiment because otherwise they ruin it. The other one is a girl I work with really close, and actually how I met my wife is actually an interpreter. You get very close when you do it that way. The other way is that sometimes I say something, the audience doesn't speak English, but they respond emotionally before the interpretation, the translation.
Got it. Yeah. That makes sense.
So the body's responding to my body. And it's a really clean example. And, you hear this in the breath, like every body-mind system in the world works with breath, Paul. Like there isn't one that says the breath doesn't matter. And, basically you're just ruining a breath every time you speak, right? You're just cutting into a breath. And you'll hear that in the breath, is it like I was interviewing someone for my podcast a few weeks ago and, just hearing their breath, there was a subtle sort of sigh, like,
Yeah, you just kind of heard.
And I knew this person after we stopped recording, even though they sounded quite upbeat in the call, there was this subtle flavor of sadness. And I just said to them afterwards, are you okay? And it turned out she'd just split up with her partner and she was going through a tough patch with the politics there in the States. And she just had that underlying sadness. Now that would have been communicated emotionally to every single person who listened to that podcast. But I just had enough professional training to actually pick up on it consciously.
Yeah, but they would pick up on it like we know. I mean, one guy, I studied this stuff back in the day. He said, like horses, when they're in the field together, they don't have the corner office and they don't have titles and everything like that, but they know who the alpha is. They know who the leader is.
Dog does, a child does.
Yeah.
It's real natural. It's real natural. Like in my single days, I'd stop a woman in the street and talk to her and say, hi, excuse me, I just thought you looked lovely. I want to say hi. And within half a second, she'd decide whether you were man enough for her.
Yeah.
Like it was an immediate emotional response. And she'd either be like, right, not interested, or she'd be like, oh, great. Yeah. My name's Sarah. Nice to talk to you. And that was an immediate emotional response that you didn't need to be trained in. As I said, like a dog can tell if you're dominating it or it's dominating you. Like a child can tell if you're safe. Children have a very good sense of that. So these are...
Yeah, but we probably train it out of them, probably.
Yeah, we have a cognitive culture and we get super cognitive. And of course, logic and, the brain has got many, many wonderful things. So don't want to be too hard on that. Western civilization is a good thing. However, there's sort of some of the downside is this kind of privileging of the cognitive over the emotional intuitive. Though I wonder if there's a sort of weird swing back that's happening now in kind of postmodern kind of West Coast style culture as well, where feeling has become the new god and everybody's offended and it's all about how you feel and it's not about the facts, it's about feelings. The swing back away from that, I think, is equally dangerous.
I'm obviously interested in that because part of course, my own project, if you will, is that we have to be more rational and more reasoned. And that I don't think that necessarily means less emotional. I mean, I think you're allowed to have both. I mean, emotions tell you what you care about. They tell you what's important in life. You can rationalize some of that, but also there's a kind of deep level in which compassion is predominantly, I think, an emotional and a relational phenomenon. It's not necessarily a rational thing. Altruism, justice, peace, compassion, prosperity. All of these things are optimism, pessimism, cynicism. They are all not just cognitive, of course, they're emotional as much as anything, which is why they're so important to leadership.
Yeah, and the whole brain's not just, nothing's just cognitive because, even thinking is like visceral emotional process and values are deeply visceral emotion. So even things like cognition, logic that might look disembodied or, actually involve the body. And there's look at Damasio, for example, there's loads of data on that now. Again, look at the science, it makes sense.
Yeah, no, I've actually dabbled in some of the philosophy around this, even some of the ways we learn mathematics, certainly begin to learn mathematics, are embodied. The body is involved. Even in some abstract thought, we'll have, in a sense, a kinesthetic part of it. I don't recall precisely this research. This is a long time ago. I was dabbling in that. But they actually think that, the part of what the body's doing when it's remembering these abstractions is it's forming, if you want, bodily models, spatial models, morphological models in the brain. I didn't look too deeply because my head was baked, to tell you the truth, reading that stuff.
Well, let me just tell you a simple example of that. Sometimes I can't remember my PIN number, for, what do you call it, PIN number for the hole in the wall for getting cash out. But as soon as I'm in front of the machine, like my body knows where that number is. So it's like just a memory, right? That's just a thought, but it's an embodied memory. And, this is true of skill acquisition, which includes social skills and leadership skills, but even things that seem fairly abstract and cognitive have this embodied element. So I kind of like one of my teachers of colleagues says, wherever you go, there you are. So, whatever you're doing, even if you're emailing, whatever on the phone, your body's involved. So then it becomes, what do we do with that? And I always say, all I teach is awareness and choice. So it's become aware of what you're doing. Mindfulness, mindfulness, embodiment is mindfulness based. And then make some choices. Do I want to keep doing this now? And do I want to keep doing this for the rest of my life? Like, that's basically it, rather than being kind of monotonal or, being a hammer and everything looking like a nail. Yeah, that's what embodiment's about for me. It's about freedom.
Choice follows awareness. That's the message.
Yeah, I think it's Sheldon Price that said that originally. And it's every personal growth methodology out there. Like if you're working with thinking, it's the same thing. It's like, what am I thinking? Have to become aware of it, and then you can change it. So it's a pretty, decent algorithm. And Also, in terms of just saying to people like, look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not in a corrective model of the body. You're standing wrong or something like that. I just say, look, notice what you're doing. There's consequences to that. Do you want to do that or try something else? And build your range there. And, nobody really minds having more options, right? That's the American dream. So it's to have more freedom, to have more options. So that's generally the framing I have, because it's pretty workable for people.
So two of the things I write about are leadership and change. So let's get on to this. So let's talk first of all about all change, even change at the social system level, at the government level, at the policy level, at the global level. It's always got a personal aspect. There are also always human beings who are changing. How is your, I was going to call it scholarship. I mean, there is obviously part of that, but how are your teachings or how are your methods useful to people who want to make important changes in their lives, either habit changes or maybe change the way they interact with their kids or their spouse, or become better listeners, or all the things that people want to change? How do we help with that in your discourse?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing to highlight is the body is itself a process of change. It's a verb and not a noun. So that's the first interesting thing if we're going to look at this subject, and we could probably think about that for a good couple of hours.
So the body is a verb. The body's a happening.
It's a process of something occurring rather than a thing, an object. That's
one of those statements that's kind of like at one level it's completely trivial, and the other level it's like, holy shit, that's profound, right?
Yeah, the first time I said that out loud just in passing on one of my trainings. I'm not sure if I heard it somewhere else, if I came up with it. And then I kind of went away and thought about it for a year, it blew my mind. It's like, whoa, I'm marking, I'm not Mark, that's crazy. But that's more for the philosophers out there. So something practical. Here's whatever you're trying to change, the body will undermine it, because you have a set of habits. A body is an embodiment, means a partial solidification of a set of habits. Yeah. So whatever you're trying to change, and for example, I gave up drinking years ago. I was alcoholic and I had to quit, and my body would just turn to go into the off license as I walked past one. It would like physically turn into one. And, physiologically, I wasn't used to regulating myself without alcohol. And I had all this energy and I couldn't sleep. And, so I had to work with the body around that, because if I didn't find some solutions to those things, I'd go back to the old solution. And, also emotional, spiritual, there's different aspects to a good recovery. But certainly involving the body would be one, even if it's just getting some exercise and burning off that charge that you used to sedate with alcohol. You have these patterns, and the body just wins. If you take your good intentions against bodily habits,
right,
your willpower lasts long.
That is such a great quote. I don't know, is that you, man? That's great. Your body just wins. Yeah,
Wendy Farmer was a great teacher in this field. She said something similar. Actually, I should give credit to different teachers. I mentioned Stuart Heller, Paul Linden, my main teacher. Richard Strozzi Heckler, I think, is the giant in this field when it comes to leadership. He's someone I think anyone can learn a lot from in this field, one of the real elders in this field. Paul Linden, I mentioned. There's a few, Stuart Heller, but, this stuff isn't just coming from me. There's a whole established field here of people working in this, and I've really built that community in Europe over the last 10 years. But yeah, for change, you will be undermined unless you work with the body. And if you can build a body that supports the change, it's going to work so much better.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, you gave a shout out to Richard Strozzi Heckler. I actually studied with him for a good number of years, more than a decade ago now. And my ex-wife actually is just doing his training, his big super embodied coach training. It's like 10 days of that. Yeah, I did a whole stack of it myself. Well, let's get back to this business of change. I mean, I could use myself. I mean, every year I set goals, and every year I realize 90% of them, even if they're big fucking goals sometimes, poker, or writing a book, or getting married, or having, all the shit that makes my life happen. I'm very good at that. And then the one that stares at me every year, I was going to say it's the same every year, but it's not the same every year, because it goes up by 5 kilos every year. So every year it's like, I'm 90 kilos. I want to be 85 by the end of the year. I'm 95 kilos. I'd like to be 90. I'm 100 kilos. I'd like to be 95. And that's something for me, which, this is so deep and so systemic or something like that. I've given up, right? I've just said, all right, fuck it. It's not going to happen. It doesn't matter how many times I go to the fucking gym. It's just not going to happen. I'm going to be the size that I am for the rest of my life. So how would a somatic or a bodily understanding help someone? Like, I believe the statistics are that 30%, no, it's more than that. It's much higher than that. Almost 40% of Americans are obese, and almost 70% want to lose weight, I think.
Yeah.
And in any
Yeah,
given,
you guys are fat bastards.
we're fat bastards. And in any year, I put on 10 kilos since I came to America. That's 22 pounds for Americans, just because of the size of the portions and my inability to self-regulate.
Let me jump in. So first of all, thank you for this. I feel like, joking aside, I know this could be a really painful topic for a lot of people. And, I'm hearing a little bit of pain beneath the sort of intellectual level. I'm hearing some pain there for you for this, if that's fair to say. So I really,
it is fair to say, yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing something real here. And this is really live for me right now. Actually, I had the same thing. I was going around hotels and working around the world, and I started to get this little pot belly, and I was like, you know what? I don't want to be like a middle-aged fat guy. It's not healthy. It's not who I am. It's not what I want to be. And even though, I believe in being body positive and not kind of body shaming, I think people may have listened to go, oh, he said fat bastard, he's an awful human being. No, actually, I'm really not a body shamer in that way. And, I think the first thing is to cut.
So I'll tell you one correlate of my thing is that I am. And I mean, I don't mean this intentionally, but just the way I was raised is that the sorts of women and men that I find attractive, I'm heterosexual, but something like that are very skinny, very thin, very fit. I think I'm not attracted to myself at the current size. And that's part of it. That's part of the anger, and that's part of the shame, and that's part of the pain.
Yeah, for sure. There's all these cycles. And so I've been really looking at this myself the last few months. We've actually got a course coming up on it. And so it's a great, it's really in my learning zone. And actually, this was a bit of a blind spot for me around embodiment. I'd looked at embodiment from all these extreme angles of martial arts and dance and working in war zones, all this stuff. But I wasn't being so aware of like, am I eating when I'm not hungry? So first of all, just that, and that was a blind spot for me. But like most people in the embodiment field are less blind around that. And just being aware of like, okay, right now in my body, I'm hungry or I'm not, so I'm going to stop eating. Like that's one thing. I'm going to keep going because there's lots here. The other thing is around to self-forgiveness. It is partly the environment we're in that makes it pretty difficult.
Obesogenic, it's called by people who are specialists, obesogenic environment.
The portion, sizes in the States, for example, be an example of that. The alcohol consumption in the UK, there's all kinds of cultural factors. So the first thing is like, okay, noticing like, all right, okay, actually right now I'm lonely, like, or right now in my body, I feel kind of sad. And this is what's driving my eating. So I feel like there's a mindfulness component of just noticing what's really going on in our body before we eat. Yeah. And also afterwards, like some sense of actually being with like, wow, I ate too much, and actually like being
sated or not sated, oversated, whatever. Yeah.
Like, so before, during, and after eating, like being present with that. I suspect most eating is emotionally driven. So having a rich emotional life is a key part of it. There's someone I really recommend called Charles Eisenstein on this. And there's a mostly female group in the UK called Beyond Chocolate. And they look at this kind of no diet model, which is not kind of restricting yourself, but actually feeling into the body and being like, okay, what do I really want to eat? And rather than going with cravings, it's like there's another level of like, actually, this is what would be satisfying for me right now. And this is, as I said, just little things like stop eating when you're full. I'm currently losing weight mostly through stop eating when I'm full and not emotionally eating. For me, they were the key drivers. But then you look at it and it becomes very holistic. Like I found I was overworking and I was rewarding myself with food. And what was actually needed was to come into the embodiment of rest and self-kindness. Because you can get into these vicious spirals like any addiction of, I'm hating myself and I'm in that body of like shame and guilt, that twist, the turn away of shame and guilt. I'm in that body of despair or maybe anger, and I'm getting into a sort of self-loathing embodiment. The thoughts are coming with that. And that is them making me eat more because I feel like shit. And that's a really good way of feeling good really quick. That's the addictive cycle with many things. And actually going, okay, can I self-regulate? There's a form of centering, which is this self-regulation, which is around dealing with pressure and stress. But there's another form, which is about dealing with grasping, like, what do you want? And this is something I think I've been fairly innovative in. Most of the martial arts-based teachers don't work with this because martial arts aren't about that. So this is where I notice myself literally get off center and get tight and, I come off balance. Maybe it's like I'm reaching for the chocolate in the shop, and then I just come back onto my heels. I breathe. I give myself a little bit of self-love. I reconnect with my values, and it becomes so much easier to walk past the chocolate aisle,
So what I'm hearing for first of all, there's a lot of choice in this, right? There's a choice. There's a mindfulness, so to be aware of our emotional dispositions, to be aware of sated or not sated, to be aware of how I guess you're talking about a little bit like our somatic relationship to food, like grasping or shoving food in your mouth or whatever all of that. Again, really super holistically, of course.
Also pleasure, like if you kind of say, for example, spend time in Italy, it's a real pleasure culture. But people really enjoy food, and there's something about actually really enjoying food rather than the sort of slightly Calvinist North European style, which we have around sex too, of really enjoying it. So there's an emotional and aesthetic satiation that comes from actually eating less, because there's like a full, rich, the first time I saw my then Brazilian girlfriend eat a mango, and my mother was visiting, and the juice is like running down her breasts, and she's like groaning, everything a red-blooded man would imagine. I was like, wow, that's a girl enjoying a piece of fruit. I have never seen that before, because English girls do not enjoy fruit that way. She was just like head back.
Yeah, sort of swimming in the goddamn thing, right?
Yeah, just loving the pleasure of it. So it's like that's a full embodied experience of that piece of food, and she's going to get satisfied much more easily. And this also applies to other things.
I dare say.
So this
kind of an exciting image in my head right now, mate.
I thought I'd put it with that, Paul. If you like Brazilian, it was a good 6 months in Brazil, living above a nightclub and doing Aikido every day and working in the favela slums with kids. It was a very interesting 6 months, but it was certainly an education in pleasure, even in environments where people were quite poor and, quite violent. There was certainly the Brazilians as a culture can often do pleasure very well. So I feel like that's part of it. It's pleasure, self-regulation, the emotional side of things is absolutely huge. And to me, that stuff's so much more effective than saying, okay, don't eat these foods. Because then I guess the question becomes, how? Like you can, like you're a super smart guy, Paul, but you've failed year on and year out in this intention to lose weight.
And I know more about fucking nutrition and biochemistry. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know shit.
And, that sort of stuff can help. It's like, okay, I need to eat some protein so I feel full, and if I have this, it's going to go to sugar real quick, and then so that kind of stuff can help a bit. But for me, it was just like I saw too many smart people putting on weight who'd read all the books, and if diets work, then just be one of them, right? And it's like actually different people need different things, and this approach of really looking at the emotional domain. Actually sometimes it's because we're lonely, we're in this kind of like disembodied, disconnected, lonely culture, and food's just a way of kind of reconnecting. I notice when I travel, I eat so much more shit. And when I'm like at home with Daria and I'm just loved up, I just eat so much better. So interesting too. And it's like, well, why is that? It's about love. It's not really about, it's about stress levels. It's about so much more.
We don't think of that. We don't think of our relationship with food as part of our systemic. So part of loneliness or part of how connected we are to community or how satisfied we are in our work. Because the feeling of satisfaction or sated is an embodied phenomenon. So if we're super satisfied in our work, then some of those other hungers that might translate into overeating or something like that will be manifest in eating. Is that partly what you're saying there? It's a huge systemic.
Yeah, exactly. It's like looking at all the different needs that you're trying to meet that way. And that's the long journey, I think, with food, and I think because our culture's so obsessed with food, which is a real fall of empire type thing, and it's a real sign of kind of spoiled brats that we are. And I feel like this is the way into depth through food, to really open up depth through this topic rather than it just being sort of a middle class kind of obsession as a way of, food for so many people has all these meanings. Like it's a way of proving you're better than other people.
Well, it's like wine. I got that with wine too. I mean, when I was a young investment banker, I couldn't tell the difference between a 1954 Chateau Lafite Rothschild and a freaking bottle of Beaujolais. I probably could that, but that's extreme, but it was all part of my identity and part of my image and everything like that. And I'm the sort of geezer that could afford the most expensive bottle of wine in the shop. So I'm going to have that.
I mean, a lot of it really comes down to kind of self-love and self-kindness. I know that can be a kind of cliche and, said with a kind of breathy Californian voice, it might be, but I really feel like a lot of this stuff comes down to that. It's like really tuning into that deep desire to take care of yourself. And it's the same with any kind of resolution or whatever. It's like, where is this coming from? Do I really want this? Is this deeply coming from deep inside, deeply connected with my values? What's driving the other side? What's that about? So yeah, I hope that helps. And the body is just one way to work with this, but it's been pretty useful to me. And as I said, there's whole systems out there like Charles Eisenstein stuff that are based on this. So it's
I actually don't know them. I don't. funnily enough, I don't know him. I know Lyndon and I know some of the other geezers you talked about.
Like Charles, he's really deep. And he talks about society and capitalism, and it's a real deep guy.
So I have a selfish interest, which is, I did a shit ton of this about 10 or 15 years ago, and I've left a lot of it behind and a lot of the practices. I was a yogi for a long time, but I haven't done that so you piqued my selfish interest in how I can use this to, work with things I work with. I work with mild depression. I work with overeating and stuff like that. I'm single and I'd prefer not to be, there's lots of things. So
I've helped a lot of people with that. I've, worked with gay community on that. I've done workshops on attraction. That's a really fun way to play with embodiment as well. Because that's right now my thing is I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would have me as a member, if you know what I mean. So when I get into a dating scenario, the women who are 57 and they're likely American and they're likely like super duper heavy, and that's part of my, if you want to put it extremely, my own self-hatred is I just can't be around people who are my age or my weight. I'm playing a game I can't win, at least under the rules I've created for myself in that area. You want the good news?
What's that, mate?
Like the lack of confidence created by the embodiment of the lack of confidence created by that self-hatred. That's the thing I really don't like. So it's like you can be proper fat and have lots and lots of women. That's not the key issue with attraction, but the self-loathing that's coming off that, the lack
how attracted I am to myself, or how attractive I find myself. Yeah.
We'll smell that a mile off. And that lack of kind of confidence, which might be quite deep inside, it might not be on the surface because, you're a consultant, you know how to stand up in front of groups and do your thing. That kind of self-love issue and the stuff around confidence, that's like, whenever I've worked with groups of women, I say around the world, I say, what's the most attractive thing in a man? Confidence is the first thing they say.
Well, it's funny because people would say who haven't, contact with me at some deep level, when I talk about the world of ideas, I'm super duper confident. And then, we picked out a domain in where at some level I smell of lack of confidence. They could smell fear.
Yeah, well, passion's another big one, right? Like you're attractive when you talk about what you love, and like that's a big one. And there's all these domains that we struggle with, and again, just being a little bit kind to ourselves. It's like it's normally like I find myself overworking at the moment. That's my kind of challenge at the moment, and the food stuff is kind of getting uncontrolled. It's like the point of focus is just working a bit hard, and a lot of it just comes back to like, why am I brutalizing myself? You know what I mean? Like this is mean. Yeah, so it's such a cliche, but it just seems that so much comes back to that. I'm getting soft in my old age.
Very cool. Well, listen, that was my selfish interest, and I might explore that too in a kind of call a little bit later, how I would get back into some of this stuff myself at a really practical level. But I want to talk about you.
Well, just anyone out there, just to jump in before the last one.
My favorite subject, mate. I want to talk about you just because I want people to know, we've talked at 50 minutes about this right now. And I want people to know where they can find you, the sort of projects you're involved in. I want them to know a little bit about the history because, we've spoken and we've yucked it up like a couple of guys and jollied around and stuff like that. But you actually work in freaking war zones, and you work in Israel, Palestine, you work in Ukraine, you work in Russia, you've worked in Latin America, you've worked all over the world making a difference in this stuff. So we've been kind of jollying along. And I want people to know that. And I want people, this is, I guess, the part where I say, let it rip, baby. Blow your horn. What are you up to, and where can people find you?
Oh, well, we're British. We're not very good at that. I learned that from my American friends, though.
Okay.
I spread my time between different projects. I'd say to anyone out there interested in embodiment, first thing is just do an embodied practice. Like, you don't have to pay me any money. Just go to yoga, go to dance, do some martial arts, whatever works for you, whatever suits your body and your circumstance. That's the first thing I'd really recommend everyone do. And, I've got rich background in many of these things myself, but I'm kind of not snobby about it. It's like, just do something with your body, any awareness-based body practice. And I still have my strong embodied practice myself, Aikido, yoga. I spent several years as an Aikido student full-time studying martial arts, as a live-in student, which is quite rare. These days, I work with yogis a lot. So anyone that does yoga, I'd recommend to check out Embodied Yoga Principles. So that's Embodied Yoga Principles. Loads of free videos on YouTube. And you can look at Yoga in Daily Life channel or just Google.
And 8 million followers or 8 million hits, right? So for listeners, of all the people I've spoken to, Mark has got, he's a pretty modest dude. But he's got the largest social media following of anybody I know personally.
Yeah, it's got pretty big. It's kind of crazy. Some of them, like it's kind of just. I just got in there early with the internet. I was generous and put stuff out there, and it's actually ended up being great marketing in a kind of roundabout way I wasn't expecting. I get invited all over the world because people watch these videos. So there's lots on YouTube about embodiment. If you just put embodiment in, what is embodiment, or embodiment and leadership, or stress, or whatever you're in, attraction, whatever you're interested in, you can find those videos. If you're a professional like Paul, and you want to kind of train in this stuff, we do something called the Embodied Facilitator course. We run that in Moscow. We run that in the UK, France. And that's more, I don't want to say too much about that because I know most people listening to this aren't kind of facilitators or coaches. But for those who, are in that kind of professional domain, that's the sort of deep dive course. If you want to really get into this stuff.
How long is EFC?
EFC is spread over about 8 months. So we have coursework and pre-work and intensives and, e-learning. You'd have to come to the UK and France for about a week each. This is about a year-long course, and we've been doing that. This is our 6th year doing it in the UK and our 4th year in Russia. So it's a pretty comprehensive course, and what makes it a bit different is we have all different perspectives there. So it's not like one guru. It's not just me. It's like multiple perspectives, multiple ways of looking at it, finding creative ways to work with it. And if you're a body person who wants to work in business, which is where I spend a lot of my time working in big business, that's a great way to transition. And if you're like a business person or a coach who wants to work with the body, then it's just super practical. We can help you do that safely and creatively. So EFC is the kind of main course. And then we do, I do business training. It's my third hat. So I was with IKEA recently. I've worked with Unilever, L'Oreal. I just sent a contract to a Russian company for a ridiculous amount of money, which funds all the charity stuff. And that's the corporate work where it's like leadership or stress management work. So they're really different hats. And sometimes I'm in yoga pants and sometimes I'm in a suit, but they're all basically the same thing. I don't do much work in areas of conflict anymore, but usually once a year or something like that, I'll take a holiday in inverted commas somewhere interesting. And I've worked with a lot of humanitarian aid work.
Holiday and work with traumatized people in war zones. That's a nice.
Well, I met my wife in the Ukraine, so it's like I can't complain. I was working in the war there, and she was my interpreter, and I had great times in the Middle East, and Afghanistan was colourful, and the slums of Brazil and Ethiopia, and Sierra Leone.
Well, tell us about one or two of those things, mate, because I want people to, partly like have a relationship, a connection with you. So I know you don't like to toot your horn, so toot your horn a little bit here, mate. Like, what were you up to in these crazy freaking places doing this crazy funkin' this Californian stuff, man? Like, how is that useful to people who are traumatized by war day in and day out?
I mean, for a few years, I was just adventuring and going interesting places and getting involved with sort of Aikido-related projects and peace building projects. For example, there's something called embodied peace building, which you can look up if you're kind of a hippie and that's your thing. Paul Linden pioneered that, and I took it forward. So I've done some peace building work, like I was in Northern Ireland not long ago, which was a real dream for me, because it's like my family are Anglo-Irish, and I'm in the barracks that, my uncle was a soldier in, and the other side of the family might have been throwing rocks at. And, did some what's called embodied peace building work there recently, which was beautiful, really, really touching job. And I've done other stuff, teaching trauma awareness a lot, just resilience work, like with aid workers, helping them not go crazy, basically using the embodied tools so they can be a bit more robust when they're helping people, because there's high levels of addiction and trauma and things like that in the average refugee camp. So I've done those sort of things. And sometimes it's just leadership programs, like I'm working with the gay community a lot in Moscow, which is a pretty a group that's been through some hard stuff.
They're really oppressed right now with this current regime, aren't they?
Yeah, it's getting a bit better, but it's been pretty bad. I've been working with them for 3 years. My best friend out there is a lesbian girl. And, they bring me in. I've done workshops on just fun stuff like attraction, and we do like management skills just to help them manage their projects better, or leadership. We're doing one on money next time I'm there. It's like the embodiment of money, because that community has a lot of issues, as do many alternative communities, around money and how we embody aspects of that. Our relationship to that, being poor is spiritual kind of thing. So I'm doing a workshop with them on money just to help their projects along. So sometimes it's kind of real practical, and a lot of the time it's been trauma and things like that. I mean, it's the more colorful element what I do, but most of my days I'm teaching yoga teachers to be more, work more psychologically. I'm teaching business people to be better leaders. I'm teaching life coaches some practical tools, so I don't want to speak too much about the sort of colorful stuff, interesting as it is.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think, it's part of what defines you. So I just wanted people to sort of have a relationship with you and have our listeners have a relationship with you. And embodied yoga, so that's about teaching yoga teachers not to just be putting people in poses. It's about teaching. It's about going the other way. Like if I was a psychotherapist, you might teach me bodily practices so I can incorporate my talk therapy. You're teaching yoga people who work with the body to work with narrative and with, all personality.
What I realized a few years ago is that yoga is the biggest embodied practice in the world. It's bigger than all the others combined in terms of the number of people doing it. And I just realized that yoga had become a little bit like body beautiful, consumerist, or hippy dippy, silly kind of new age.
And you think that's a bad thing? I think that's a good thing. I think that's the spread of yoga, but you think that's a kind of an abomination, don't you?
No, I think yoga spreading is generally a good thing. Now I think of it as a good thing, but I went for a stage of just feeling like its heart had been ripped out. And what I realized was there was a real gap there, niche, if you will, for a way of doing yoga, which was psychologically rich without being esoteric and Eastern.
Yeah,
and I've got nothing against exercise, and I've got nothing against, I'm a Buddhist, I've got nothing against Eastern disciplines, of course. But I realized we could use yoga in a way which was, helping people with their confidence issues. Like I got an email a few days ago, and it was from a student of mine who said, I did your embodied yoga workshop and I learned to say no, and I learned confidence, and I learned to embody that, and I got out of an abusive relationship. And for the first time in my adult life, I'm not being hit on a regular basis.
Holy shit, right?
And I was like, whoa, goosebumps, like this person had learned in a fairly short space of time how to have the embodiment of being able to say no and walk away. And, she credited that to the embodied yoga. Now, yeah, stretching your hamstrings and strengthening your quadriceps is important, but it's not important like that. And it just strikes me that there's a
what an understatement, right? Like the body beautiful. It's not important. Like I'm not being hit every day,
right?
I mean, that's just a kind of modest way of putting something that's life altering, right?
Yeah, right. And it's sometimes people, it's not, they're going to get hit or whatever, but it's just like, it's about confidence, or like the Russian girl I was working with, she said like, oh, I really wanted the autograph of my favorite pop star. And I did a little bit of embodied yoga, and then I was able to walk up to them and talk to them. And I was so nervous, but I managed it. And, it could just be a little thing like that. It's certainly useful in relationships. We explore a lot of relationships in embodied yoga because, life's about relationships. It's not about you on your yoga mat on your own. And it's just fun as well. It's social. We bring a lot of stuff in. It's a whole new way of doing yoga. It's really like genuinely, it's different enough that some of the yoga establishment hate me because it's really quite different. But it is still yoga.
Yeah, well, whatever. As Taylor Swift says, haters going to hate.
Haters going to hate. First they laugh at you, then they're angry with you, then they join you.
So that's cool. And what about out here in America? So are there embodied yoga people who you trust and respect, or do you have students out here?
We have one with perfect dentistry called Jamie, who's an American who trained with me in England and who's started to do some work out there.
Boulder or Cali or where?
No, she travels around, but mostly the Midwest. And I know there's interest. It won't be long till there's schools across the states. At the moment, we're in Russia, Sweden, France, Ireland, Spain, all across Europe. It's kind of spreading around the world. So I haven't particularly wanted to go there a lot. But if students from there want to come to any of our teacher trainings and have a nice time in Belfast or Stockholm or Moscow or London, then they're very welcome to come on over. I feel like that would be the next place that kind of catches on.
Well, yeah, Boulder's only an hour from me, so that's pretty fertile.
It'll go down pretty well in Boulder. I like Boulder. It'll go down pretty well there. I know there's been some interest from there. It's just, it's a big hop for people to come over to the UK.
Yeah, and while a lot of the people, she said one of the things that you do amazingly, I could probably talk to you for another hour, but anyway, a lot of the people who are attracted to you are people who are from the New Age discipline. And it's something that you could be quite caustic and dismissive of, because a lot of the yogis, a lot of the spiritual people, and a lot of the people who work in peace and social justice and all of that kind of stuff, and all of the people who are coaches and facilitators in business, all of that, they're all like super duper spiritual, as my friend says in inverted commas, and stuff like that. But you're... well, I don't even know if I want to get into the bad Buddhist stuff right now, but it's interesting in that community because you think there's a disembodied aspect to all of that. I'm more spiritual than thou type of thing.
Is it trying to transcend the body and get out of reality? I feel like it's just a matter of development. There's definitely a big group of people who have gone through, they've been spiritual, maybe they've been broke, or they've gone through kind of being snobby about it, and they kind of come out the other side and they're looking for something which is deep but has a kind of grounded, kind of real quality to it. And, I'm provocative and I use a lot of Anglo-Irish humor, and it's not everyone's cup of tea, but, you don't need to be everyone's cup of tea. There's a good amount of people that like that. So I just feel like I need to go fairly soon. Actually, I need to wrap up. So I just feel like what I do is I love embodiment. I put it out there to anyone that was interested in it in different formats. And be myself doing that. And it seems like over the years that there's been enough people interested in that, I'm still in business. I don't have to get a proper job, Paul, which still astounds me.
Well, I want to say thank you. I know we're at an hour now, and I know you have some stuff to do. So I'm deeply appreciative of you and the work you do, and you spending an hour here. And it's kind of cool. It's so different than anything I've done on this podcast so far. But I found some personal inspiration, and I'm just very grateful to you, mate.
Cool. It's a real pleasure. You're always welcome with mine and Darius if you're ever out here. We might, on our world tour, I'm having a summer sabbatical. My wife wants to play some poker, so we might swing by so she can play some poker with you.
I'll be in Vegas, and I'll put you guys up.
That is not a bad idea. Maybe we'll meet up in Vegas. That could be fun.
For the World Series.
Paul, I need to run. I've got to get a train to London. So you take care, mate. All right. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Peace. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
And now we have a cool part of the show. My favorite part. Well, for all my favorite parts. I'm going to talk about 3 books that are very exciting. The first one is Steven Pinker's new book, and we've got Steven coming on the show just shortly. Now, his new book is called Enlightenment Now, The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. I'm a big fan of Professor Pinker, and he and I are going to have a very robust discussion about his new book. I'm particularly passionate about the Enlightenment topic, so we have 2 other podcasts coming up in the Enlightenment sometime in the summer, probably, from the former editor of The Economist and a philosopher from the University of California. But let's focus now. We're going to have Steven Pinker on the show. There's a link to his new book, Enlightenment Now, in the show notes. One person who really powerfully influenced my own writing and thinking when I wrote The Science of Organizational Change is a professor called Scott Lilienfeld. And he's written 2 books that I just think are absolutely outstanding. Almost, if you're follow popular psychology or even professional psychology, life-changing. One is called The Great Myths of Popular Psychology, and he has about 50 of those. And some of these things we take for granted. Some of them are folk wisdom. Some of these are actually passed around by psychologists as truths. And he debunks them with evidence in a way that I think you'll find really enlightening. He also has a great book called Brainwashed, The Seductive Appeal of Mindless Neuroscience. Someone said if Andy Warhol was alive today, Andy Warhol would be painting brain scans and not Campbell soup cans, which I thought was kind of interesting. So it's very fashionable to put in an article on psychology a picture of a brain scan because it makes you look very clever, and they are beautiful, let's face it. But how much does neuroscience really help us understand mind and behavior at the macro concerns with which we're capable of? I've even heard people talk about when you coach someone, you want to target their amygdala, which is nonsense. Even though there is an amygdala and it has some important things to do, the idea of a coach talking to someone targeting it is pure bizarreness. But anyway, I'm going to recommend those 3 books. It's got 2 of Scott Lilienfeld's books and one of Steven Pinker's books, and there are links in the show notes. They're really, really sort of, my point of view, life-changing books. So I recommend them heartily to you. Thank you.
To celebrate the launch of the show, and to thank you all for listening, I'm going to be giving away books. Lots and lots of books. All you have to do is leave a review in iTunes. We're going to raffle off a book every single week for 12 weeks. So head on over to paulgibbons.net/iTunes to get easy-to-follow directions and let me know the title of your review to make sure that you're entered to win. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Think Bigger, Think Better. Great ideas are great, but this isn't gospel. Share your critical thinking in the comments. Where do I disagree? What insights were most powerful? If you got value, don't forget to share the value by sharing the podcast. Finally, to get information on book and blog releases and new video content, head over to paulgibbons.net and join the community of thinkers talking about using science and philosophy to make our world a better place.